Welcome to Army Fitness. My name is Dwain and I'm your host. Today I'm interviewing Ant Clark. Ant is a 400 meter sprinter specialist. He is also a sports scientist who studied at the University of Stellenbosch. We are going to be speaking today about your VO2 max and how you should be training as an athlete or just a regular individual. This is going to be a really informative conversation, delving a little bit into sports science, nutrition, and a whole bunch of other things we find interesting. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Guys, today I'm sitting here with Ant Clark. He's a personal trainer at IMF and a sports scientist. We are going to have a scientific conversation today. Well, we'll see how scientific we can get. We're going to be speaking a little bit about biokinetics, what a biokineticist is, what a sports scientist is, how you get involved in something like sports science, personal training, coaching. So I think it's going to be a good one. I also want to touch in today about the average person and them coming into the gym, what they should be looking out for, how they can get the most out of their training. We want results, obviously, all of us as human beings. We don't like putting in effort if we're not going to get a reward for it. So, knowing how to achieve your reward as fast as possible, as simply as possible, and also, in the most effective manner is some advice that everybody should be listening and should be wanting, especially in the time we're living in right now, going through COVID and everything, and all the hype about the immune system and obviously being healthy. And you and I were chatting a little bit off camera now about how many people we've seen running and walking and just trying to get fit and healthy, which is awesome. But there's ways that you can do it that are so much better than just trying to go out just on your own and exploring, the incorrect ways of doing fitness versus just listen to the professionals. Let us help you out. Let us save you some years and also probably save you a couple injuries, because what does suck, and we've been through it, especially when you've been in the game as long as we have, we get injured too, the professionals get injured, but that's a good thing because it's learning curves for us. We then know how to treat our patients and our clients differently. So loads to chat about. I think we're going to dip in a little bit to diet and nutrition as well. But let's get started. Let me break us into what is a biokineticist, because it's a common question. People always ask, what's the difference between a biokineticist and a physiotherapist? Or when should we go and see a physiotherapist or a chiropractor versus a bio? So in a nutshell, a biokineticist is a physical rehabilitation specialist. So we deal with injuries. But we also deal with chronic diseases and disabilities. And a biokineticist's job is a lot more practical and functional than a physio or a chiro, in a sense that we don't really deal with symptomatic treatment. So if you hurt your elbow, you wouldn't come into a bio straight away and we wouldn't look at just your elbow. If you hurt your elbow and you came into us, we would be looking at your body in a holistic sense to see how, and why your elbow is actually sore. Obviously, there's a difference between an acute and a chronic elbow pain, which we would have to identify first. And if it is chronic, we would then try and work out how your body's compensating or why your body's compensating, and has those compensations led to a biomechanical imbalance, which over time has managed to irritate or cause enough friction, which has now caused pain in the elbow. And we've seen it so many times as bios that elbow pain can come from your neck, it can come from your foot, like leg length imbalance. There's a whole bunch of different things if you're looking at the body holistically. And I think in a nutshell, that's the biggest difference, but that's not enough for you to understand. So let's break it down even more. A biokinetic consultation would look something like this. Okay, you as a patient, you would come in or you'd phone in and book an appointment. Very often, I would then read up on those injuries, especially if it's one I haven't seen for a long time. If it's a common, you're coming in for an RTB or a lower back or something, but we get all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and it's always good to read up and just have it fresh in your mind. And the best thing that you can do then is to go and watch the person arrive. So I always like to end my sessions with a 15-minute break. So I've got 15 minutes to jot down any notes from the last session, and then time to go and observe. So the first thing is observation. You're watching how your client comes into your session. Even if you're meeting them from the first time, if you can see them, how they get out their car. They may have a limp, they may struggle to get out the car, even walking up the stairs. You can tell a lot about a person's posture just on them walking. I'm sure you're the same, but I'm like obsessed with it. I'm watching people in the shopping mall. It's like a disease. I'm just seeing posture imbalances all the time. But yeah, so once the person's already walking towards us or even walking into the office, you're already picking up little cues. You're looking at their feet and seeing if one's externally rotated. You're watching the knees to see if there's a collapse. You're watching the movement in their hips, and you're seeing if they've got if they have a Trendelenburg sign, which basically the hip collapses. You're seeing if their shoulders are aligned and how forward or back their neck is. How they're carrying a bag, if they're carrying a bag, and it goes on and on. So that observation is important. And then obviously the initial question and answer, which usually I'm nothing less than half an hour. But I could probably get the injury and work out the person's injury just from the question and answer, majority of the time, or at least I know 90% this is probably what's happened. But by the time we get the patient, remember, they may have seen an orthopedic surgeon, they may even had surgery, they may have seen a doctor or a physio or a chiro. We are sort of the last port of call before the person can get into a personal trainer, a coach, or a sports scientist. And our role is really to get that person pain-free and functioning again optimally, or even better than what they were before the injury. And a lot of it is education. So as much as we're listening and we're going to correct, we have to teach, because what we want is our patients to learn why they were injured in the first place, specifically if it's chronic, and I'll explain the difference now. And when that person then leaves, they really feel like they've got a full value. So they've left not only with obviously their injury being fixed now, but they've left with a lesson that they can use for the rest of their life. Because often if you have shoulder problems, you have shoulder problems. They don't just go away. You're going to have shoulder problems your whole life. Same with the back, same with the knee. And that's just because of your genetic makeup or your biology sometimes, or your sport, other times.
Yeah, definitely contributes.
And we can sort of solve these problems by listening, watching and learning, and then adjusting. So after the chat, what we would do then is a functional movement analysis. So we'd ask the person to move, and we would see how they move and then judge those movements on a score, basically. There's certain criteria that we look for. We also do special tests, which may become before the FMA, depending on the injury. And the special tests are really where we identify an injury according to textbooks that have given us, okay, so you do this test to identify that injury. And if the person tests positive, then we know most likely it is this injury. After that, we always check posture. So, posture is king. Like, if you have a good posture, the chance of you developing an overuse injury or a chronic injury is much, much less than someone with a weak or, poor posture. So, and it's something that we always correct no matter what the injury is. So if you're coming in for a knee pain, and we've worked out, well, the knee pain is because you've got a increased Q angle, and the Q angle is like that because you've got a weak glute, and we've worked the glute enough for it to correct that problem, we will not address the posture. Because if you have a poor posture, let's say in your back, and you've got a bigger kyphotic curve than the normal person, we want to correct that, because that's going to lead to an injury later on. You start swimming, or you start doing push-ups, or you start doing something.
Just when you're old as well, just quality of life.
Exactly, you'll get shorter, and your shoulders will blow. So we're always addressing that too. And the biokineticist really needs to be able to get that person from phase one, which could be just in a small space, in an office, on a bed, to return to sport. So we go through generally 4 phases. We've got phase 1, 2, 3, and then what we call return to sport, which would be getting the person to a point where they are so confident that they can go back to playing soccer, rugby, or whatever sport they are into. Before they were injured, they should be able to get into like a pre-season sort of mode. We don't work on the fitness, that's not our role, but our role is to make sure that the joints, or wherever they were susceptible, is now bulletproof. And we have the confidence that they can go back without re-injuring that area. And in actual fact, the likelihood of them injuring that area should be less than any other area. And then we can say, okay, go back to sport, or hey, go see someone like Ant. And that's really where the role of a biokineticist is, and how we sort of intertwine with our coaches, with our personal trainers, and with sports scientists. So did I explain it well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely covering.
There's so much more.
It's a big field.
I'm like, I want to go into it.
It's a big field.
Let me just quickly explain the difference between the chronic and acute, so we know. So an acute injury would be an obvious one, because that's something like I was running and then I twisted my ankle, and now I've torn my ligaments on the ankle, and we know, okay, he's got a lateral collateral ligament sprain or tear or whatever, and those tests are pretty simple. the harder injuries are ones that someone has like RTB syndrome.
Yes.
And now you've got to work out, well, RTB syndrome is not something that happened because you fell or you were in an accident or it was because you started sprinting and your hamstring tore. It's something that's developed over time because of a biomechanical imbalance.
Yeah.
So what it comes down to is chronic injuries are always caused from biomechanical imbalances which lead to compensatory patterns. And those compensatory patterns over time will cause friction or pain or swelling or something like that, or some form of tightness or weakness.
Yeah.
And the bio's role is to identify the weak areas of the body, make them strong, identify the tight areas of the body, stretch them out, make them long. And if you keep to those simple processes for physical injuries anyway, you'll be a good therapist.
Yeah.
And really the rest is not too difficult when you understand the body, and if you take everything into holistic consideration of how people move and then live and then play and then factor in a whole bunch of other things like nutrition, hydration and sleep, and you're giving the person the best chance to heal and recover.
Perfect. I think that covers it pretty well.
So tell us about a sports scientist. I want to know for youngsters coming up, why would they study sports science? What is a sports scientist? Tell us a little bit about your studies. What cool things did you guys get to do in the lab?
Yeah, so I think first thing to understand is that sports science itself is like a very broad field that encompasses like multiple different disciplines. So we'd actually consider biokinetics and biokineticists as sort of one of the fields within sports science itself, that being sort of the more rehab specialists. But then we can sort of break it down into all sorts of other things, like a biomechanist, which is someone that looks purely at how people move and how we move in different sports or in life, our running gait, our throwing gait, what is the best way to kick a rugby ball, perform a rugby tackle, do a soccer header. So that would be like a biomechanist. There are things like an exercise physiologist, which is what I'm more trained as, which is basically really looking at the science behind exercise. So that's how exercise affects our bodies, both on sort of a big macroscopic scale, like if I do this, will I get stronger or weaker or whatever, all the way down to the cellular level and sort of the molecular biology side of things. So, this is the tiny molecules in our body, all the enzymes, the proteins, the atoms and stuff. How does this affect us? How do we get better through exercise?
That was one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah,
I loved it, like breaking down even to a mitochondria level and how those things sort of, transport nutrients. It's so interesting when you look at it, and like when you know how the inside of the body works on that level, and you think about everything outside of our bodies,
it translates through so well. I think that's exactly it. The reason I love that the most is because that lets me know why I'm doing something specifically. Because if I know how the body responds to a certain type of exercise at that molecular level, all the way down to the hydrogen atoms and the ATP molecules, and we can talk about excitation,
glycogen being broken down into the ATP. That's such an interesting one, and I think I'd love to hear you explain it. Because it's something that everyone will want to know about, is how fats, proteins and carbohydrates are broken down into a usable energy source, and then obviously the storage of glycogen, and then glycogen being converted into ATP and being used by the muscle, and obviously the byproduct of that being the lactic acid, and how that's then converted and used as an energy source and then removed from the body, and the side effects of lactic acid and DOMS, and the delayed onset of muscle soreness, and how, because it's a big factor. It's a big factor in when people come in and train out and work out for the first time, and they saw those first couple of weeks. We should be able to explain to people why. And also, if you're a good trainer and if you're a good client, or even us, let's call ourselves good athletes, we should be able to continue experiencing DOMS right throughout our training. Like, some people ask me all the time, do you still get stiff? And I'm like, yes, I get stiff. After 20 years of training, I'm still getting stiff, because you continuously changing the way you train so that your muscles, have to readapt, and you continue getting better and better. So sorry I took us off topic there.
No problem. We'll get into all that stuff. So that's like exercise physiology. Those are basically all things we sort of consider in it. Then there are things like motor learning, which is how the brain programs.
Cheryl Calder. You remember, she was like one of the first on the scene. I think she took our Cricket World Cup when we won for the first time. The soccer guys, she was with the rugby guys. She did all that light therapy where they would like.
The eye vision stuff.
Yeah, she's got like
we had a vision lab in Stellenbosch.
It was brilliant.
Yeah,
that was her game.
Oh, really? So maybe she got involved in actually setting it up in there.
And then biomechanics was also super interesting with the levers and pulley systems.
The physics of movement, a lot of it. So how we actually apply force through our bodies to the outside world. So that's also in biomechanics. And then there are people like also sort of the strength conditioning coaches. So I'm also a strength and conditioning coach, and those I think you could use interchangeably with the term performance coach. So it's like a very specialized, I guess, personal trainer, to break it down simply for people. So your job as a strength conditioning coach is to take an athlete or a team of athletes in whatever sport and get them to perform physically at their best on the day of competition. So they need to be at their physical best, which is going to help them be at their mental best, and obviously that's going to hopefully help them execute all of their tactical and technical things that they need to do to sort of win on the day. So we talk about the strength side of things, so that's actual physical strength, being strong enough, and sport-specific strength, so we'll get into that a little bit later. And then also the conditioning, which would be like sort of sport-specific conditioning. Obviously it's going to change from sport to sport. I think the strength conditioning coach will be way more involved in the conditioning side of things than like a soccer team compared to a marathon runner, who obviously is going to have a coach that is sorting out all of the endurance, because that's essentially the sport. And yeah, I think that's sort of like the greater field. Those are sort of some of the primary options. Obviously there are other things like researchers within all of those fields where you actually go and try to explore the limits of human knowledge, and and build on those bases that then practitioners can hopefully take forward into the field and actually make a difference in people's lives. And I think obviously the best way to get into sports science is first to start inquiring about it. Obviously, find out what you can do with it, and then pick a good university if you're really interested to study in it. There are things offered like BA or BSc sports science degrees. At the undergraduate level, I don't really actually think there's too much difference between them. Whatever you study, BA or BSc, it's not going to matter that much.
The BSc, there's just maths.
Yeah, there's more science subjects. So there's a little bit more physiology.
Well, the physiology, not really. It's the maths that's the hard thing, because if you didn't do maths and science in school, like I know a lot of schools, you can drop science for, I think, biology or geography or something like that. It wasn't an option when I was in school, but now it is. And if you've done that, you can't do a BSc, because when you get to university, the maths is like, if you've done higher grade maths, it's higher than higher grade maths.
Yeah, but you do it for one semester.
You do it for one, but you got to pass the semester.
Yeah, you do got to pass it, and it is quite tricky. That, and also just in the subsequent years, and as you go along throughout the degree, there's a few more sciencey subjects. So there's a few more like physiology, which is basically biology of the body subjects. But once you get past those first 3 undergraduate years, if you're really interested in a career as like a sports scientist, in your postgraduate years, normally you're going to end up covering that info if you're interested in it anyway. So like I know personally friends that have done the BA sports science, which doesn't have as much physiology and maths and biology as the BSc sports scientists, but they've gone on to become like really exceptional researchers in sort of those kind of areas. So there's always an opportunity to sort of learn more. And I think the biggest thing is, regardless of what you pick in your sports science path, is to get as involved as possible as you can in your degree from the get-go. Ask as many questions from all of your lecturers, see where you can help out with work, either even with the lecturers, especially as you get older and get more experience in the degree, whether you can help tutoring things because you learn by teaching a lot. If you can assist in labs and experiments, if you can participate in studies, that's a great way to learn a lot about the whole process of sports science, and like especially being a researcher, actually volunteering to be a participant, and then volunteering to help out like local sports teams, especially if you're at a university that has sports teams. If you're part of the sports science department, they're normally more than welcoming to have you as part of the setup, and that's where you're going to learn the most, is actually sort of by doing, and then you're also going to learn where your interests lie. It's going to help guide you.
That's a big one. I was going to say getting a job like at a school or inside a gym, but that's what I did at the time. But it's even better if you don't have to, and you can actually go and volunteer for the more professional teams, because they won't pay you, but they'll take you in and you could watch and learn. And what you're going to learn there is just, it's incredible. We were privileged to have the SA7s guys in the gym all the time, and what we got to learn from just watching those guys train, it really it advances your career in a big way.
No, it really does. I mean, I definitely know that. I think probably one of my number one regrets from my study time is I got really heavily involved in a lot of different things, and a lot of different training things. But trying to get involved a little bit more in the more professional setups, because at the time I was like, sure, could I really go? Because I knew the biokineticists got to go and sort of do work experience at SAS, which is where the Blitzbooker were based and stuff. But I had a friend who, in Masters, which was in 2016, which was the Olympic year, and the first year that the Sevens were part of the Olympics, he just went, we were playing Chuck as the Marty Sevens against the Blitzbooker. And he came to watch, and he'd been involved in the strength and conditioning setup with the Marty's team and stuff. And then he saw the strength and conditioning coach for the Blitzbooker, and he just walked right up to him and said, hey, I would love to learn from you as much as possible. And the guy said, well, we're actually about to begin our cycle for the Olympics. You can come shadow me throughout that. And so he got to shadow, a national team.
Wow.
In their prep for the Olympics, where I think they won bronze, if I remember correctly. So they won a medal. Obviously, they were probably hoping for gold.
What happened to your mate? Did he get a job?
He set up his own business now, actually, and he's doing quite well. He's built it up
How awesome
really
was
well.
that story?
Yeah,
Ben, if you had got into the Blitzbooker team setup.
Yes,
know?
Yeah, no, I mean...
But that's the opportunities. When you go and get involved and you work for free, and you're doing an internship per se, you find opportunities out there.
No, exactly. And I mean, look, I think for him, he was really setting up his business. He probably could have worked his way into the Blitzbooker setup, because that's how you do it, is sort of those are the number one ways. But just the chance to sort of learn from how they do things in that type of setup is always just something I think that's very invaluable. I remember asking him questions on what they were doing in there, and he would tell me that their training is, it's actually really simple. It's just specific to their goals.
And just tell us a bit more about the science side of it, because a sports scientist, you hear working as a coach, a trainer, conditioning specialist, but the science side of it is you're in a lab, conducting tests on people. Tell me about some of those tests. I know you do VO2 max testing, and let's teach people about it. What goes on there?
Yeah, so in my master's, I worked in the Stellenbosch Sports Physiology Lab under a really, really good scientist, Louise Engelbrecht. I know I might not have always seemed so appreciative because it was hard work in our masters. And, she probably taught me some of the most useful skills and the most useful info that I've learned so far in my career. And that was exercise testing, and it's more specific, especially endurance focused, VO2 max testing. But then also a whole host of other things like body composition testing, power tests, and a whole range of sort of lung function tests, exercise-induced asthma tests. But the main thing that we did was, like I mentioned, was the VO2 max testing. So I think before you want to understand what a VO2 max test is, you need to know what VO2 max is. And VO2 max is basically the maximum amount of oxygen that our bodies can consume, and we like to put it per minute just to give it a sort of time frame. So it's the maximum amount of oxygen our body can take in, so we can breathe in, and we can actually deliver to our muscles and utilize in the muscles in the space of a minute. And we put it in liters per kilogram per minute. So we also like to put it in relative to your body weight, because we could also actually just put it in general, but then it's not very specific to a person, because obviously a much bigger person is going to have bigger lungs, they're going to have a bigger heart, they're going to have just more muscles in general, they're going to take up more oxygen in general, so they'll have a very big VO2 max, but it doesn't mean relative to the body weight that it's it's that big.
It doesn't mean that it will equate to a performance difference.
And that's what we're going on to next. Why is VO2 max important? Why would I want to know the maximum amount of oxygen that I can consume per minute? I think the most basic way of looking at it is that it's a great indicator for your endurance performance. So in order to endure, to last, so to endure is to sort of last through an uncomfortable process, to last while exercising, we need to burn energy for it, and we need to burn energy sustainably. And the only way we can burn energy sustainably is to utilize oxygen while doing it. Now we'll get into the gritty details hopefully.
Well, going back to what we had said about the cellular level, oxygen molecule is necessary to bind to glycogen to form the ATP molecule, is it not?
Yeah, it's used in the breakdown of both glucose and fats, what we call aerobically. So that's with oxygen. Aerobic is a pretty easy way to remember air with oxygen, and then anaerobic means without oxygen, because you can break down carbs without oxygen.
Anaerobic would be like doing an Olympic lift or performing a sprint, something less than 10 seconds generally.
Yeah, unsustainable exercise. Mm-hmm. So something that you won't be able to last very long with. Let's say less than 5 minutes.
Sure.
Just cut it off there randomly, which is pretty 5 and 6 minutes is normally what's commonly used.
And just on this, because this is super interesting, so like an anaerobic athlete, you take a sprinter or a weightlifter, they would generally have bigger muscles.
Yes.
You know, and those muscles, that's the difference between a type 2, which would be a muscle that's better geared towards hypertrophy, so it's a bigger, thicker, fuller muscle that explodes more rapidly than a type 1 muscle fiber, which is better catered for endurance.
Yes.
And, you know, marathon runners, which is smaller muscle, which requires less oxygen, but can handle a more repetitive load.
Yeah, they basically better adapted to endurance. Yeah, muscle fiber type's like a really interesting thing, because it's actually a whole spectrum, so we often like to cut it off. I think the most common way is to do sort of 3 types, which is type 1, your type 2A, which is like your sort of in between, but they're type 2 muscle that's pretty good at endurance. So they've got a lot of mitochondria, which are like the powerhouse of the cell, but they also still have those characteristics of like the type 2 fibers, so they have lots of contractile proteins in them. They respond very quickly to a nervous system, so they contract very quickly and very strong to a nervous system signal. And then you have sort of the type 2X, which is the more what we'd consider like the real fast twitch muscle fibers, which is, you know, highly explosive but very poor at endurance. But now what we're discovering, you know, more and more all the time is there's actually a sort of whole range of these muscle fiber types. And that
you can teach them slightly.
Yeah, you can.
You can't change a 1 into a 2, but you can be in the middle somewhere by training the 1 more like a 2.
And and you can also and a 2 you can especially get to take on sort of more of those characteristics, but still be pretty powerful and pretty strong. And one of the things I've always found really interesting is that if you take a sedentary person and compare them to like an elite level sort of strength athlete, if you look at their fiber type percentage, relatively they actually have a higher ratio of type 2X fibers, like the sedentary person, compared to like the power athlete. But that's because strength training actually takes those type 2X fibers but gives them sort of more qualities of the type 2A fibers, so more mitochondria, increased resistance to fatigue and stuff, but they still keep those like really elite level strength and power capabilities in them.
Because some of the negatives of having a type 2X muscle is like they get injured really often. You know, the muscle will pull, it's not as like enduring to like movement really. So like, when you see it in sedentary people, you realize how easy it is for them to get in. Like a sedentary person go and run straight away, okay, they've torn something, and it's often a muscle, and you're like, well, I didn't even know I had muscles. Well, yes, you do, but it's this type. It's not fatigue resistant. And again, like coming back to what we then do is our job would be to make that muscle more fatigue resistant. I think all of my patients have heard that term because I like I gun it to them. I'm like, fatigue resistance, this is how you don't pull and tear and strain and get your muscles into a spasm. They've got to be strong, and they've got to be able to maintain your posture over all the hours that you're standing, you know?
No, exactly. And I think one of the like things, especially that people don't realize, sort of the least trained you are, the less specific you need to be. And any kind of strength training is not only going to make you stronger, but it's going to improve that endurance, and especially like really help with that muscular endurance. As well as aerobic endurance even, and that is also going to help. If you're more resistant to fatigue, you're less likely to injure yourself. And also just, I think, you know, often with a bigger muscle, you're normally doing activities that are sort of more forceful, exerting, especially in that type of athlete, so there's often a higher risk associated with those, with that kind of like muscle tearing injury. Maybe not so much like
we've dwelled off VO2
we've gone off VO2 completely. So VO2, let's go back to it. So VO2 is the maximum amount of oxygen you consume. Why is consuming oxygen important? Because you need it to burn exercise sustainably. VO2 max, practically, and I think this is the way most people need to understand it, is sort of the highest exercise intensity that a person can sustain for about 3 to 6 minutes. Depends on your fitness level. Some people might even be able to push it to 7 to 8 minutes. Very talented. But it's the highest exercise intensity that you could hold for around 3 to 6 minutes. So if we just look at a runner and we look at their VO2 max speed, so that's the intensity that they would hit their VO2 max, let's just say randomly at 17 kilometers an hour, they'd be able to hold that for sort of 3 to 6 minutes, and that would be their VO2 max speed. So it means they have a pretty good potential if they can, you know, get up to 17 k's an hour hold for that long. What's more important for performance, and what we would especially look at, so obviously people are excited in VO2 max because it's a maximal capacity, and people really like the idea of having a high max at anything. But for endurance performance, what's normally really important is also looking at what we call the lactate threshold. Also has been called the aerobic threshold, the anaerobic threshold. It's got a lot of different names. Just in our lab, we just said lactate threshold or lactate threshold intensity. We just sort of coined it there. And we actually combined it with the ventilatory threshold, which is a different name. But that basically transfers to the highest exercise intensity that you can sort of sustain for a prolonged period of time. So it's the point, the exercise intensity where we begin producing lactate exponentially, and it just sort of correlates to that time. What is lactate? So we mentioned anaerobic training earlier. We mentioned that anaerobic means you breaking down an energy source, so it would either be carbohydrates or phosphocreatine. Those are the two. You can't burn fats anaerobically. Breaking it down without oxygen. Why is it beneficial to break down stuff without oxygen? Without getting too complex, you cut out a whole bunch of processes, so it happens a lot faster. Then if you break it down aerobically, why is it not beneficial? You don't produce as much energy per glucose molecule as you would breaking it down aerobically. And also then one of the byproducts is this lactate or lactic acid at first. And what happens to that lactic acid, it dissociates into lactate, which is actually a kind of like almost salt, it's another molecule, and a hydrogen ion atom, so a hydrogen atom. And that hydrogen is actually what makes your whole cell, your system acidic. So that's what makes burn in the muscles, which I think we naturally know you can't hold that. You can't keep that burn going. It's just going to get worse. So it's basically the cutoff exercise intensity of, if I exercise at that intensity, I can hold it for about 40 to 60 minutes. If I go above that intensity, and especially the higher I go above that intensity, the quicker I'm going to fatigue. I'm not going to be able to finish the race, or I'm going to have to finish it much slower. The cool thing about lactate threshold is it corresponds really well to race pace, as we call it. So especially in distances in running, say like between 10Ks and like a half marathon, your race pace is going to be very similar to your lactate threshold pace. And then we can also take it and prescribe exercise intensities from that lactate threshold pace. And that's probably one of the best ways to sort of apply and figure out our exercise zones. Because as we'll get into later, if you exercise at certain intensities... Explain it now,
because it's such an important thing for people to understand. All our wearable devices, which we want to chat about now, you can work out your VO2 max and lactate threshold yourself. So it gives the opportunity to just normal everyday people to become a sports scientist themselves, and the more that everybody learns about it, the healthier population we're going to have. So it's really important for everybody to take the responsibility and the onus on oneself to educate yourself about the body, the physiology, and how you can use these things like VO2 max and lactate threshold. They're the two simplest ones to really start to play around with and understand, other than heart rate, of course. So from a practical sense, I think it's important for us to understand how to use those, So just explain the zones and how you would make someone a program using the information you would get from identifying what their lactate threshold would be.
Yeah, so training zones, they basically, if we try to think about it as practically as possible, they're just different exercise intensity zones. So there'll be a range of an exercise intensity that we know if we sort of train at that exercise intensity, we're going to be targeting sort of a specific region or like area of endurance, a specific adaptation, if you will. Because the whole principle of training is, the way I like to think of it is, we're ringing alarm bells, so we're applying a stimulus, and that stimulus is alarm bells. It's actually a little bit of a shock to the body. And then the body has to adapt to that stimulus, because if you go out and you run as hard as you can and it feels like your lungs are bursting, your body actually perceives that as a threat, and it thinks, yo, that wasn't so good, that was a bit dangerous. I now need to figure out a way to get better so that next time I have to do something like that, it doesn't almost kill me.
I just explained this today. I have had a new client, and he, in his first session, he lasted about 10 minutes. And I explained, your body's just taking on the exercise as a threat. And then obviously within the next 2, and it was simple stuff. I mean, it was really just a bunch of stretches. But even that was enough for someone that was so sedentary and hadn't been training for such a long time, and adapted and adopted rather a unhealthy lifestyle, that their body could perceive it as such shock.
Well, that's exactly it, and that ties into zones pretty nicely. So what that means is that because you're ringing specific alarm bells, your body adapts in specific ways. So we were looking at running zones or running intensities. If I train at a certain running intensity, it's going to be a certain type of stress to my body, so my body's going to adapt in a different way. And I think one of the most common ways is we look at either 5 or 6 zones. I'll just keep it short, so I'll keep them to 5. So we'll sort of have our recovery zone. which is like very easy. That could just be going for a light walk. Some people, a walk could even be more, because like you said there, your client used to struggle even with stretches. That could be a very high intensity zone for him. So the first zone would be basically recovery. Second zone, we'd look at what we'd call a base endurance zone. So this would be going pretty slowly. For some people, it could even be a walk. For others, if we use running as an example, a slow jog, and generally you would work in the zone for a long amount of time. So we're going to have a whole bunch of effects. It'll help you go for longer in that zone. It's also going to affect your heart. I'll get into the specifics maybe, but like just after I've gone through all of them. Then the third zone is our aerobic endurance zone. So this is a higher intensity aerobic. It's still sustainable. It has that aerobic air, so it means we're still being able to utilize oxygen easily to sort of do our exercise, but it's starting to get a bit uncomfortable. Our zone 4 would be lactate threshold zone. So that's what I mentioned earlier, lactate threshold. So it's the highest sort of sustainable exercise intensity you can do for about 40 minutes to an hour. If you were to just go at that pace, that's pretty uncomfortable. It's often quite painful because you're starting to build up some lactate when you do it. You're on the brink between when you build up way too much lactate and exercise is going to feel unsustainable. And then zone 5 we'll call just roughly the high intensity zone or the anaerobic zone. And we could split that up into a whole host of other zones, but to keep it simple, just keep it anaerobic zone, non-sustainable. As soon as I go past that zone 4 into that zone 5, I'm now looking at I can last 10, 15 minutes maybe max. The higher the intensity goes above that zone, the shorter I'm able to last, all the way up to a full sprint, whereas most people can only hold a full sprint for 10 seconds, most people even less if you haven't done any sprint training. So those are sort of 5 zones over there. Then if we were to look at sort of how we adapt to each one, zone 1 I already mentioned was recovery. That's pretty simple. It's a good thing just to get moving, get the blood flowing, aid the recovery processes. When we get the blood flowing, we get proteins and all the good things to our muscles, and we remove sort of metabolites or muscle damaging things from them. Zones 2 and 3, we look at our sort of aerobic development zones. So they're lower intensity. We like to talk about peripheral and central adaptations. So these would work on what we call the central meaning more central into our bodies, our hearts, and sort of our oxygen delivery capability. So we're looking at our sort of heart and our cardiovascular system. So basically the heart and all the arteries and veins.
Triathletes call it building the engine.
Building the engine, that's exactly it. So we're looking at how well we deliver oxygen to the muscles. So those are central adaptations. I think that's probably the best way to think of it. It's all about oxygen delivery. So that means we're working on getting a stronger heart, a thicker heart wall. It's able to also take more blood into the heart and pump more blood out the heart with each beat. It's also going to affect our actual venous system, our capillary system. Yeah, it's going to affect the nervous system. So what you're going to look at is at the same exercise intensity as you get fitter, especially if you do that kind of training, you're going to have a lower heart rate at that intensity. And that's because it's pumping more blood per minute, and then the central nervous system doesn't have to work so hard, doesn't have to stimulate the heart so much with the sympathetic nervous system to get it going.
And just to break in here again, is like your perception of the exercise becomes so much more tolerable.
Yes.
Like, just to go back on that client, the reason I spoke to him about it today was just a memory, because today he's 5 weeks in and we started doing deadlifts and Olympic lifts and got through a full hour of training versus the 20 minutes in his first session.
Yes.
And it was just amazing to see how the body and the mind has adapted to accept exercise as something that's good for you, and he's starting to feel amazing and like almost, that bulletproof feeling when you're first starting to get fit and
so much more because you can.
Yeah, so it's amazing how your body can adapt to long periods of training and exercise, specifically in that zone 2 and 3.
Yes, because that's essentially what it's there for. It's to help you be able to go further, easier. We're not looking so much at speed in that zone 2 and 3. It's not going to help you run that much faster or cycle that much faster, but it's going to help you be able to go further. It's going to help you to be able to sort of sustain that lower intensity really well and also recover in between higher intensity efforts. So say you then push into that red zone, that zone 5, up a hill, or suddenly someone's trying to make a break from you. In cycling, that's a classic example. Someone tries to make a break from the bunch and you have to chase them down. You go up into that red zone, but then you come back down into that zone 2, zone 3, or zone 3 more in a race, even zone 4. You're going to be able to recover faster because you've built the machinery with the heart. You've built that ability to deliver the oxygen to the muscles with the heart, and also the capillary system, our veins. We get more denser capillaries, so we can actually send more blood to the muscles. at
I
one
suppose
time.
it's also very important for the average person to learn these zones, because let's say you want to fuel yourself in a race.
Yes.
You can't start consuming food in zone 4, zone 5. You're going to feel sick. You know, your stomach is just not going to be able to break it down. But in a zone like 3, 2, you can.
So
timing of your meals and understanding the zones and how you fuel yourself is very, very important.
It's true, no, because the higher the intensity zone, the more blood you're going to have to send to the muscles. That's why our heart rate increases as the zones go up. The lower the zone, the lower the heart rate. So the higher the zone, the higher the heart rate. And yeah, you have to send blood away from the stomach, where you wanting to digest all that food and actually get the glucose and stuff to your muscles, and then send it to your legs. So that's why, you can't really take in food if you're in that red zone.
Yeah.
Zone 4, the lactate threshold, we're really working on being able to sort of sustain the time that we can last at lactate threshold. So it's a good zone to train to work on feeling comfortable in your race pace. And then zone 5, we're working what we call the peripheral adaptation. So that's adaptations within the muscles themselves, also especially to the nervous system, but more high intensity, so our real sympathetic activation system. And that's going to work on all of our max things. So zone 2, zone 3, working on sort of building that base. Zone 4, working on sort of that endurance race pace. Zone 5, we're working on how fast we can actually move. Zone 5 is going to increase our VO2 max via a whole bunch of different mechanisms, like getting more mitochondria, bigger mitochondria. It affects our enzymes, which are molecules that perform all the chemical applications in the cells. And then it's also going to work on our maximal sprinting speeds. It's going to improve your speed at VO2 max, so that what we spoke about earlier, say your speed at VO2 max was 17 kilometers an hour, working above lactate threshold is going to help bump that up to 18, 19, 20 kilometers an hour. Hopefully then it's also going to take that lactate threshold and bump it up. So say if our lactate threshold was at 14 kilometers an hour, our race pace, we work above that lactate threshold. It pushes up our VO2 max to 20 kilometers an hour, but it also takes our lactate threshold, pushes up to 16, 17, 18 kilometers an hour, 19 kilometers an hour. The best athletes in the world have a lactate threshold that's really similar to their VO2 max. It's sort of 5 to 8% off.
When you convert it into kilometers per hour,
yes,
it's interesting you do that from a sports scientist perspective. I'm just thinking from an athlete's perspective, like when I'm racing, I actually look at heart rate.
Oh yes.
And the reason being is because your heart rate may always be, or it will be different according to the slopes, the gradients, the terrain, the temperature on the day, your preparation on the day. So if you're thinking, well, my lactate threshold, is at 178 beats a minute, and you've converted that to a 3.5 minute K, let's call it over 21K, and you watching the 3.5 minutes, but you haven't seen that your heart rate spiked above 180 because you're going up a hill, you will blow.
Yes.
So I think I always convert it into, and I don't know if you were getting there, but I always convert it and watch the heart rate, not necessarily the speed or the pace.
Yeah, it depends. It's a mixture of both. If you're training on relatively flat terrain, then for some of your quality sessions, like when we're working in the lactate threshold zone, if we're wanting to work in specific high intensity zones, then pace or wattage is king. Obviously people have bike meters and watt meters, so they put them on there. But then obviously that's going to change if you hit like a hill with a steep gradient, or even if you have lots of downhill, because that's going to be easier as well to keep going, especially for cyclists. I mean, when you're cycling downhill, all of a sudden you're going to be able to achieve a much faster speed, so you're not going to be actually working in that zone. What's pretty good is to try and combine, I think, the heart rate. Obviously most people don't have access to fancy, power meters are super expensive. They don't have access to something that can measure your power output and get your zones in power or speed.
Come to our gym and use the watt bike.
Yeah, the watt bike can do it. Yeah, there you can get it there. But most people have access to something that can measure heart rate, so that's why heart rate's pretty useful. The thing about heart rate as well is it can also vary from day to day, especially on your what we call performance condition. Watches are actually starting to try and measure performance condition.
I agree with you. I found though that at the upper heart rate, so like at your lactate threshold,
yes,
it's quite accurate. If you go, maybe it's just been accurate for me, I don't know, maybe we can get a few people commenting on that, how accurate it's been for you guys using lactate threshold in actual test or real life scenarios. But if I know my lactate threshold from a watt bike, mine was sitting at 178. If every time I went past that, if I went over the 180, it was instant. It was almost instant. I could feel if I don't slow back off now, I'm out this race. You know.
Oh no, definitely. So it'll almost certainly always be like that sort of max there. But some days, you know, you might have had a really poor night's sleep. It could be really hot outside as well. That's going to affect it. And you find that you actually you achieve that sort of lactate threshold heart rate much faster, so at a much lower exercise intensity than you sort of used to.
But even then, you've got to back off.
You've got to back off. Or you could even hit that lactate threshold sort of at a lower heart rate if you. Yeah,
and in those days you get your personal bests.
But that's why also like the perception of how you're feeling. That's why often when people prescribe, like when we worked in the lab, you would have not just your sort of speed zones or your pace zones. You'd have your pace zones, you'd have your heart rate zones, and then also just like the color thing for how you should be feeling as well. So, you know, like blue or light blue is one, it's easy. It's like, you know, it's a walk in the park quite literally. And then it goes, you know, to green, to maybe like darker blue, to orange, and then to red. That's why we talk about the red zone, because you can feel it. It's perceptual as well. And that's probably the most basic and the easiest way for most people, especially people starting to learn how like to either to run, to cycle, to canoe, whatever the endurance sport may be. I think it's always good to, before you jump into using heart rates and fancy tools to measure your paces and your speeds, to learn how it feels to exercise at certain intensities, especially because you're going to improve so quickly at the start that whatever prescriptions you put on heart rate or pace or anything are going to change so quickly, and it's going to be really easy to get your programming wrong and to like either injure yourself or not be training hard enough, so it's going to mess up your whole progression. Whereas if you learn, you know, if I'm in zone 5 I should be feeling like this, or if I'm in zone 3 I should be feeling like this. Like I think for runners they often use, you know, sort of zone 2, zone 3, you should be able to hold a conversation pretty comfortably when you're going. Zone 2, you should be able to chat. You should be able to go for a 2-hour run with your friends. You should be able to chat the whole time. You know, zone 3, it's getting a little bit tougher, but you can still talk pretty easy. Zone 4, you can kind of get out a few words, but it's hard. It's hard to talk. You don't want to talk because you actually now having to focus on like what you're doing more. And then zone 5, you shouldn't be able to talk. You're pushing now. The only thing you're thinking about is how well I'm running, preferably, or surviving.
We also use a scale in biokinetics called the RPE scale, rate of perceived
scale,
exertion. And if it goes on a scale from 0 to 20, and if you check when people ask, if you say, you know, where are you feeling, and someone will tell you it's a 15, you just add a 0, and that's roughly 150 beats a minute, and it's very accurate if you answer correct.
We used to, when we did our VO2 max test in the lab, we would, at the end of every single stage, you hold up the Borg scale thing. It was like from 6 to 20, and they would have to point on there, and we'd have a picture as well next to it on how they're feeling.
Helps. And
it's amazingly accurate. The funny, so like lactate threshold hits for a lot of people between sort of 70 and 80%, and then if you fit it, it gets more and more. But for a lot of people that we have, especially like the weekend warrior type guys, it was so amazing how often that lactate threshold would hit on sort of that like 15, 16 kind of exercise intensity. Some people less, like the less fit you are, the sooner it hits.
Amazing. And
it's like
your heart is bigger than your performance ability. You know?
But
let's quickly speak about, I think we've got in depth there, which is good. And I hope it gives people a good understanding of the zones. Let's go a little bit into how people should be training. Like if you're a first timer walking into a gym facility, or even without a gym facility, how you are training for specific results. So, you know, we've got lots of people that want to know, if I come in, how can I put on muscle? How should I be training for that? Or if I come in and I want to lose weight, what's the best way for that? Or if I come in and I want to get fit, when I say fit, let's make it more specific. Let's say I want to run a marathon. How do I, or not even a marathon, let's just call it any endurance sport that you need to be going for longer than 2 hours. How do I train for that? So should we walk through those three examples? I think those are the most three common I can think of. Is I want to put on muscle. How do I train for that? I want to lose weight. How do I train for that? And I want to get, let's say, fit, where I want to be able to do an endurance event that lasts longer than 2 hours.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So I think the first thing is, you need to, when you go to a gym, actually, you know, inquire, be completely honest about what your goals are. And normally you'll get pointed in the direction of a trainer who'll help you out with that. And then you should have a consult and be completely honest with that person about, like, you know, what your goals are, how much time you have available to train, like be really honest about that, because it's not going to be any use to you if you say, oh, I can commit to 6 times a week, but in reality you can only do 2 because you're living a busy life. And your exercise history, and let them know your experience, because that's going to have a huge impact on how we train you. Because someone who's never been in a gym before, I could give a very general program to, and if their goal is to sort of like put on muscle or something, it's going to help them put on muscle pretty easily as long as we get their diet right. Or if their goal is to even improve like their running performance, it can be an almost identical program. It's going to help them get that running performance better. The muscle.
I think you are too smart and specific for me to offer you such a broad example of explanation, but let me give you a more specific case, right?
Yeah.
Let me give you an 18-year-old who has an exercise history of whatever he's done in school. So he's played some rugby, maybe even messed around in the gym a little bit, and he now has finished school, and he is a student but wants to learn how to put on some muscle. So it comes to you, and how would that person, what sort of sets and rep range and rest?
Okay, so into those specifics.
Yes, into those specifics would that person need to do to achieve hypertrophy, so muscle mass?
So hypertrophy, improving muscle mass. There's a whole bunch of different mechanisms as to like how we actually improve our strength. So the first thing is the best way to put on mass is to actually lift weights, and especially free weights. So they've been proven to be a little bit different to like better than machines, only using machines. And not just using free weights, but building the majority of our program of compound exercises. So when we look at an exercise, often we'd like to term them as a compound or an accessory exercise. I think it's the simplest way. A compound exercise just means an exercise that works multiple joints, and because it works multiple joints, it's going to work multiple muscle groups. So it's going to work more muscle groups per exercise. Why would that be a really good thing to do for someone wanting to put on muscle? Well, you can get more bang for your buck per exercise, so you're going to get more work done in the session, essentially. And also they normally have a much bigger range of motion than like a machine exercise or an accessory exercise, and we have a bigger range of motion. Range of motion just simply means the range that we're actually moving, motion, so I'm then going to actually work that muscle a lot more because it has to contract in a more full rep range, so there's going to be a stimulus to it. Then when we look at sort of how hard we have to work in order to build muscles, it's pretty hard depending on how experienced you are, but normally it needs to be feeling at sort of like an 8 out of 10 kind of weight. I like to use RPE for when working it. So it's a decently heavy weight, but it's something that you can take for a relatively good number of reps if we really wanted to focus only on building muscle. What I mean a decent number of reps, I mean in the realm of sort of like 8 to 15, even maybe up to 20 reps, but then that would be more accessory exercise. But between 8 and I'd say 12 to 15 reps.
So textbooks for hypertrophy is 8 to 12, right?
Yeah.
But as we know, it's quite a controversy of those rep ranges.
Yes.
You see bodybuilders lifting like up to 20 reps at a time to get a muscle pump.
Yeah.
And so even though the textbook would say for strength it's 4 to 6 reps or less, and for hypertrophy it's between 8 and 12 reps, and then for muscle endurance it's 15 and above reps, it's not always the case.
No, and what's coming out a lot more on the research now, there's a lot of really good researchers on this, like Brad Schoenfeld, he's head of, I think, training at NSCA, or he's heavily involved there, is that it's not so much, if you do 8 or 12 or 20 reps, it's that when you do those reps, you must be pushing very close to failure, or what I'd prefer to call technical failure. Mm-hmm. So what's that? That's sort of the point where you can't really do another rep while holding your form. Mm-hmm. So you can maybe force out a couple of reps with really ugly form. Some people, especially some bodybuilders and stuff, they put that in their methodology. Mm-hmm. But for most people, we don't want to risk it too much. It depends.
We won't also bash. Let's also give the guys that know what they're doing, because some of the bodybuilders that do it, they're not too focused on the concentric movement anymore.
No.
What they're wanting to do is, once they fail, they actually just want to get it up and then eccentrically lower it down as strong as you can, because they know the eccentric is where they're really building and tearing that muscle. So, but the problem with that is the inexperienced bodybuilder and the young people that are watching them with these amazing physiques, they're like, oh, they see this throwing action and then they're trying to do a bicep curl throwing and pull their back out because the form is so shocking. 100%.
I mean, the pro bodybuilders they're the best guys in the world at bodybuilding, building their muscles. I mean, that's what they do for a living. So that makes sense. But for most people, if we look at it's more just, if we just look at the science, to actually just build muscles. So you're not at that elite level bodybuilder. You're not looking at working in your anterior delt and getting that fiber just right and the symmetry between the two sides. You're looking, I'm just out of high school, I want to put on some muscle. It's not so much about like, the maximal number of reps you can do. It's about taking a certain rep range and going almost to failure on that rep range, typically for between 4 to 6 sets on exercise. What they look at even now is we look at a certain muscle group or a certain movement pattern, and we look at sets per week. And we often find that 10 working sets per week for most muscle groups is enough. So what a working set is, once again, it's basically a set that's taken pretty much to failure. Obviously, you can't go to complete failure on the first set because then you're not going to be able to go to failure on the second set or the third set. We always like to maybe leave 1 to 2 reps in reserve, but it's a really hard weight to say. I pick a squat, I want to put on muscle in my quads and my glutes, and I can squat, let's just say, I can squat 80 kilograms maximally for 10 reps. I'll take like 78 kilograms and I'll take it for like 10 reps and I'll go for 45 to 6 sets. And then that's going to be a really good, just hypertrophy set on my quads. And then I'll supplement it maybe with some quad specific stuff, like with leg extensions or lunges or something, some other activity. And then over the course of the week, I look at getting sort of roughly 10 sets in that specifically target the quads, specifically target the glutes, and they're those hard working sets where I grind out the reps, basically almost to failure. That's what it needs to be. It does include your warm-up sets, so that's a mistake. I think that's very common when people go into the gym. I especially see it at varsity. And the guys, they like look at a program and be like, okay, I've got 4 sets of bench press. I'll go first set like 80, second set 90, third set 100, and fourth set 110. And then the 110 is really hard, and they crank out the 10 or 12 reps or whatever, and they're pushing it, but they've actually kind of wasted sort of like 3 sets leading up to that. Whereas they should have done like 1 to 2 warm-up sets. Like let's go 90, let's go 100 or whatever, or even less, set of push-ups, then 90, 100, and then let's crank out 4 to 5 to 6 sets at that 110 over there.
The best way I was explained it, or I've read, or I don't know, but it's like find your working weight, and then start counting.
Yes, so that's exactly
like
it.
Let's say, for example, you're doing a bench press. Then what you would do is even just with the bar, no weights at all, and then you slowly go up until you get to that weight where you sort of get, okay, I'm failing now at rep 9 out of 10. I'm starting now. Whether it took you 5 sets to get there or 3 sets, you should at least take 3, I would say.
Yeah,
but
three to be safest.
If it's taken you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to get there, then get there and then start counting.
No, that's exactly it. And I think then we got to look at sort of like the structure of the workouts. I already mentioned compound exercises. I mentioned that we're looking at sort of getting like working sets, 4 to 6 working sets in a compound exercise. So examples of compound exercises: squats, bench press, deadlifts, shoulder press, bent over rows, pull-ups. Weighted pull-ups are a great one. So those, now if we look at the structure of a session, we'd normally want to pick sort of 3 to 4 compound exercises, and then sort of 2 to 3 accessory exercises per session. Depending on your experience level, will depend on the number of times you need to work out per week. And then training structure, there are all sorts of different ways. If we look at, we're wanting to build muscle, and the different theories. So you've got the classic like bro splits, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, where like chest days Monday, leg days Tuesday, back and bars or is like Wednesday. We go on. So there's like splitting per muscle groups, works well. There's pros and cons to everything. There's a push-pull kind of split, so we look at the actual sort of style of movements. So we'll look at maybe lower body. So one day will be a lower body dominant day, and there I'm hitting like straight-legged like my compound exercises could be something like squats, straight-legged deadlifts and lunges, and then I'll finish it off with calf raises and like leg extensions, hamstring curls, and that would be a good session of like between 6 and 8 exercises total. And then you'd look at your push exercises. So it's a push dominant. Over there, it's going to be targeting things mainly like our chest and our shoulders, our triceps, pushing movements, and your compound exercises could be something like bench press, single arm shoulder press, and then like a flyer coming through, and then you can do accessories with like triceps and pec deck machine. It really gets sort of small and specific. Pulling day, that's all your pulling movements. So that some people include a deadlift into it because you're actually working the back quite a lot. It's going to be a little bit more back dominant, so it looks a lot like a back day, but we're looking at more about pulling movements. It's going to hit our backs and our biceps and stuff. So compound exercises once again would be like bent over rows or any kind of rowing variation, pull-ups to hit the lats, those are good ones. The deadlift, of course, because the deadlift, even though you're pushing with the legs, you're pulling with the back. Huge amount of lats activation, huge amount of traps and mid traps and rhomboids that need to get involved there to do a really big deadlift, so it's a pretty good exercise for that. And then also things like sort of back extensions, pulling up, and then our accessories, bicep curls, machine rows, smaller movements that are sort of more targeted at specific muscles. And then the final way is basically, which is sort of one of my favorite ways of doing it. It's especially good if you have like lots of days available in the week to train. So we're looking at 5 to 6 minutes, would be like a full body split every day. So each day I'll pick like 3 to 4 compound exercises, and so they'll target the major muscle groups, and then each day I'll just choose and like vary my accessory exercises. So one day I might feel like doing biceps, I might feel like doing shoulder, lateral raises and stuff. And that's pretty effective if you have a lot of days in the week because you get to recover in between. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think that's a good explanation about it. I think that really sums it up nicely, and there's so many ways you can evolve from there. That's like what you've explained is really the beginning and basics of how someone can just simply get involved for the first time and learn how to start achieving hypertrophy and building a bit of muscle. And for me, it's very important to build muscle because it helps bulletproof the joints, and it helps condition the body to be able to handle loads that you really want to be able to handle, to start doing the bigger compound movements and like Olympic lifts. And when you can get there, now we can really start training you as an athlete.
Yes.
And we can really start to push the physical boundaries of your body with confidence, knowing that you can handle those loads without getting injured. But yes, you have to condition your body to a point before you can start those kinds of movements. But what I've found now is once you've built a certain base and I'm at the right body weight now and I've got the right amount of muscle, and then you can start breaking your week up a little bit more holistically to go,
yes,
let's have a lower body conditioning day where you sort of target the entire lower body, an upper body conditioning day where you just focus on the upper body, and then you've got a full body which you can do a sort of functional day, almost like a CrossFit style of training where you do like a typical example would be a thruster, which is like a squat with an overhead press and a movement, or you would do things like crawling up and down, walking on your hands, jumping, exactly those types of animal full body movements. And then obviously you should always throw in a cardio day, so you're working your cardiovascular system just for health. And then it's always good to have another day where it could be skill based and mobility based. Because the thing is with us, and as well, when we stop playing school sports, unless you go and join a club and you keep playing other sports, you start to lose the skill of lateral movements, so side to side stuff, because our everyday positions are sitting. So we're here in the anterior dominant position and we get so tight in the front side of our body, and then we take up sports like cycling and you're back in that position again and you're working those same muscles, or we go for a run, but we don't run side to side, it's just straight along the thing.
That's why I like trail running, because I feel like I'm actually moving a little bit.
I love trail running, it's definitely my preference is to go running, and just to be out in nature is the best. But so there's loads of ways you can evolve it, but you've explained it really nicely for someone coming in for the first time, what sort of exercises you can expect and sort of how you can expect to train. Those sessions would typically last an hour, at least 45 minutes to an hour a session, and there's loads more that goes into it, obviously, like the amount of time you rest is really important in those sessions. The recovery will come in, obviously, how often you're sleeping, again, what you're drinking, hydration, nutrition. The nutrition for hypertrophy is so important. Like we were speaking off camera a little bit about amount of protein per kg. And I've seen it with myself in the last year. I was very much a follower of like a specific amount of protein per kg, and I would calculate exactly my meals, and by reducing that protein content by like half, obviously research has evolved and you start to try and experiment different ways, you can lose so much weight. Yes, you do lose some muscle mass, because muscle obviously requires that amount of protein if you're wanting to keep on or to keep having hypertrophy over time. You need to constantly fuel yourself with enough calories and ultimately protein to help build up the muscle that you're destroying. But you don't need as much as you think to be a good athlete, or even to achieve the goals you want to achieve.
And it varies for an athlete over the course of a training year. At different times, for different focuses, you need different nutrient requirements.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to remember muscle is weight. So if you're weighing at 80 kgs and you expecting yourself to move well, but the muscle isn't increasing your performance, and you could weigh potentially 70 kgs, 10 kgs is a load of weight, any way you look at it. And another valuable lesson I learned is that muscle requires a lot of oxygen. So the more muscle you're holding, the more likely those muscles are going to fatigue faster.
Or just you carrying more weight, so automatically to go from point A to point B, you have to do more work because you're working more against gravity with more weight, and so the oxygen requirement to go is higher.
One example I give is like riding enduro motorbikes. I would get arm pump, which a lot of guys suffer with.
Yes.
And I mean, I was getting such bad arm pump in races to a point where I couldn't physically grip onto the bike or use the clutch or the throttle. I'd have to stop, put the bike off, and then sit for a couple of minutes, massage my arms out, to a point where I'd actually gone and considered surgery, where they were going to cut the fascia and release it. No, genuine, because it was so bad. And just the reduction in muscle mass has changed that whole game. And that's one example. I've got another example, cycling. So cycling a 90k or training ride for me has always been a big indicator, specifically for my triathlon loops. So I know that at 60 Ks, if I'm going at my lactate threshold, my legs always seem to blow. Like my quads would just swell up to a point where they would feel like, you know, even when I was standing, I couldn't really move them or bend my knee anymore. They would just get so swollen and full of blood.
3-minute max watt bike test.
But obviously,
even though you're not going at that intensity,
dropping a little bit of muscle mass, staying the same fat percentage, but dropping the muscle mass has somehow contributed to a difference in that, because now I can go for the full 90 at lactate threshold.
And it doesn't take much, I think, because it's very easy to want to lose weight to perform better, but it's also very easy to get too cut, like sort of, I need to lose weight and worrying too much about it, and you know. Then you can sometimes actually be a bit detrimental to performance and to health if you try too hard to lose too much weight, because some people just naturally, you know, they're supposed to perform sort of at a certain weight, and it becomes harder and harder for them to drop that weight coming off. But for other people, you should probably look at maybe spending less time in the gym. And
the point is, it should feel natural to you. It's your body weight and the way, you know, it shouldn't be a difficult thing.
It should be, if you just keep to a reasonable caloric deficit for not too long a period of time, let's say 8 to 10 weeks, that you get down comfortably. It shouldn't be a real struggle.
But even holding the muscle mass, like I'm talking about the guy, the 18-year-old that comes in and says, hey, I want to build muscle. It shouldn't be that much of a chore. You know, you're either a guy that's going to put on muscle really, really easily, or you're one of those guys who are going to, but you know, you got to make it so that it fits in your lifestyle, and that you're not doing anything in excess, and it's not becoming an obsession to achieve that, because you've got to ultimately ask yourself, what is the function of it? You know, the function of building the muscle is to protect the body. Let's not, you know, get obsessed with the physical nature of what that muscle looks like.
Only if you're one of those top bodybuilders, but that's up to you.
Rare exception. Otherwise, you know, it's got to be there for a reason.
It's not going to be fun to have huge delts if you can't, you know, put your arm above your head when you're 40 years old. You know, you want to be able to, when you're 80 years old, get your arms above your head easily.
100%. Longevity is one of the key focuses for any good trainer, and we should be instilling those practices and principles into all of our clients. You know, so we're not trying to get the fastest possible results, but trying to sustain those results for the rest of our clients' life. And again, it comes down to that education. We also teachers, and we want people to learn about their anatomy, their physiology, and their bodies holistically. let's get on to the next next case study. So let's take a 40-year-old divorced mother of two who has sort of neglected herself over the last 10 years and done nothing. Let's say she is an estate agent and drives a lot during the day back and forth, and can commit an hour a day for 5 times a week. And she wants to lose, let's say, let's call it 15 kgs of fat. She is overweight if you look at her on the BMI scale, and typically doesn't have a diet. She doesn't follow anything. It's a drink or eat whatever's in front of her type of a diet. Let's start with, look, let's say she understands, she's gymmed before. So she's 40, so she understands the gym. Let's say she's also played sport back in school. How would we start with someone like this, and what could she expect in her sessions?
So I think the first thing I always try to do with someone who's like so focused on like losing weight and that's their goal is to sort of try reduce that priority slightly, because it's actually going to help them achieve that goal if they're not obsessing over the weight the entire time, because they're going to enjoy the process of training a lot more. And so I start like immediately, I start seeing like what they can do in the gym based on what they say. And then similar to what we mentioned earlier with the hypertrophy training, I do start often teaching compound exercises. Why? Because they work more muscle groups, so they burn more energy, so they're going to be pretty good for fat burning. But also because they help teach you how to move, and they can also build a lot of confidence in yourself. If you know the client has not been doing so much of late and their confidence is generally pretty low, that's why they're wanting to lose 15 kilograms. The feeling of being able to do something more is a pretty addictive feeling, and so I look at building up sort of some basic skills, so like building up a basic squat or being able to do a full push-up again is like a really nice goal. And then I supplement that instead of with more the pure accessory exercises that we spoke about in the hypertrophy guys, I tend to like always in the later half of the session start adding in high intensity kind of training. So we look at sort of more high intensity interval type of training, and this can take place in almost any format or style of exercise, but generally it's going to be exercises that work a lot of the body. So like you mentioned earlier, things like thrusters or squats or even burpees, rowing, running on a treadmill, skipping if the knees and the ankles are strong enough. We always got to be careful with adding in jumps. I don't just add jumps into conditioning sessions straight away. So it's going to be more of sort of like a strength component. That's going to be a lot about moving better, getting stronger, feeling more confident, maybe building a little bit of muscle as well, because that's going to help if eventually with the aesthetics, which is often a major goal. When losing weight's a goal, often the reason is aesthetics is the primary reason. Sometimes it's for health. Sometimes people have had a health scare.
Yeah. So I think I need to just jump in here, because what I've worked out is that looking good is a side effect of being healthy.
Exactly.
And you don't have to force the weight loss issue. It's getting in here, learning about fitness and
your body, what you can do.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you would almost go through the same sort of things of hopefully getting to a 5-day work week, like we're doing a lower body conditioning, the upper body conditioning, a functional, some skill-based. You ultimately really want to get the person that just wants to lose weight, and they want to be well at the end of the day.
And also enjoy it. I think that's also something that I really, with a client who a big focus is losing weight or something like that, often trying to actually make the process enjoyable.
Because it needs to become a lifelong behavior.
Yeah, you don't want it to. The worst is and it happens almost all the time. You get someone come in and they say, "Look, I want to lose this much weight, and I want to do it in 3 months."
Yeah.
And I say, like, why do you want to do it in 3 months? Like, because the problem is you can do it in 3 months often if it's reasonable. Even if it's unreasonable, you could do it in an unhealthy way and waste your muscle away and dehydrate yourself, and it's not going to be good for you at all. But then you're going to give up after 3 months, and then you're just going to cycle back and end up in the exact same place, and then you're actually never going to feel good.
Most often worse.
Yeah.
So most often when you do put yourself through that dramatic stress to achieve that goal that's unattainable, you then decide to go back to your normal behaviors.
Yes.
And your body goes, well, I don't know when I'm going to get this cake again or this Coke again, and I just store it as fat, and it really messes with the body's way of regulating insulin and other hormones, and that plays a massive role in how your body utilizes fat as an energy source and also stores fat. So it's one of worst things to happen to a person, because when that happens, they give up on exercise and fitness in general. And you know, it's a big responsibility for us as trainers and coaches to be able to teach people exactly what we're speaking about. And like, if you obsessed with that, it's bigger than just the weight.
Yes.
Because what we need to be obsessed with is being healthy, being well.
That's exactly it. And so that's why my focus with that client when they come in would be more getting them to learn about moving, enjoying movement, enjoying the process, getting them coming in consistently through that process. And then we slowly start talking about things like diet, and we start adding in, and I don't like people, because people, when they start an exercise program, especially, you know, for weight loss reasons, their motivation is normally super high right at the beginning, and they're expecting all these changes, but we're all human, and you can only make so many big changes in your life at once. And stepping fit and committing to like a big exercise program is already a pretty big step. So to add a very hardcore diet at the start, which is what a lot of people want to do, I think is just a little bit too much for us to sustain. So I like looking at getting people enjoying the whole process of moving, seeing what you can do with their bodies. Then we start doing like setting little tasks like, you know, I want you to cut down on the amount of calories you get from fluids. So I want you to try not drink any fluids with calories in it.
That's a big one, like fruit juices and chocolate milk, and those are massive ones that you hear of people consuming on a daily basis. Like I have a friend of mine who actually asked me about this recently, and he drinks iced tea. He's like, oh no, I changed from Coke to iced tea. And I was like, my man, but that you haven't fixed the problem here. But yeah, I mean, diet is also, it's such an interesting one, because you really don't have to overthink diet.
No.
And there's so many misconceptions, specifically about fruit.
Yes.
You know, with people wanting to avoid fruits because they're high in sugars and all this rubbish. And you know, there's no ways fruits are going to make you fat. And I think
you have to eat a lot of fruits.
I think it'll be, you look at like people that live in the jungle and that, and their only resource is fruit, and they look amazing. And it's like, look, fruit will make you fat when you've got banana on a pizza or pineapple on a burger. But
banana with Nutella spread on top or something like that.
That's when fruit makes you fat, you know, strawberries dipped in chocolate and cream. But on its own, I mean, the best sources of sugar that we can get. And often when you're craving sweet things, when you crave it, what your body's actually asking for is fruit. And you'll see your body tells us a lot. Like when we're so tired and you often craving then meat or protein, it's because you need the protein. You've got to then go and eat that, and it'll help your body recover. But on this 40-year-old lady that's come in, and maybe just in general, should we talk about, like, let's give an example of like a healthy diet, like, you know, what would you suggest to people just getting started, or try this out without, it's not a diet, it's more like nutritional suggestions.
So the suggestions is the way it goes. I'm not an advocate for here's a diet plan, here's what you must eat every meal.
I think diet plans, like, again, as much as we slate
some people it works.
It has to be for athletes and people that can understand why we're eating like this and these.
An athlete will almost always follow, especially if they've got a performance goal in mind and they're a serious athlete, they'll follow diet to a T. Everyone else, it's just these restrictions that you really, it's just a list of restrictions of I have to eat this.
It's another thing to be like anxious about.
To worry about and to get the groceries specifically for that diet.
Yes, you need it. You got to do the macronutrient. You got to count your calories. That's an athlete, but everybody else, no.
Even then, so so like I mentioned earlier, I tend to start by like the first step, the first challenge. I like to challenge them like with it is to try and cut out getting calories from fluids, because that's just automatically can be like 1,000 to 2,000 calories a day depending on how much someone drinks. Because if you have a 500 ml bottle of Coke, what's it, 55 grams of sugar or something, so it's like 400, no, not quite, it's like 200 to 250 calories. It's like 4 calories per gram of sugar. But if you, so that's the first task, to cut that out. Then, especially for sort of female clients, what I like to try and do, because I've just found, especially now even in lockdown, I've had the time to track my clients, what they eat a little bit more, is the protein intake. And I think, especially for female clients, because, you know, someone who maybe is wanting to lose weight and is fearful for, you know, the fattening side of things, might not actually want to eat too many meat products or like eggs or cheese or something like that because they're scared of the fats that are contained in them. and then they don't know where they can get protein from besides that, and so they end up having exceptionally low protein intake. So the daily recommended allowance of protein is like 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. That's already being debated right now in many circles, and many people think it's too low, that it should be higher. And then, you know, these people are actually having even less than that. They're having like 20 to 30 grams of protein over the course of an entire day, is what you'll see, and that is so low. What people don't understand, if you aren't getting those proteins in, you use proteins in almost every single bodily function. They form the structure of most of the machinery and functions in your cells. They form the basis of an entire class of hormones, peptide hormones. Peptides are protein building blocks. So they're hormones that are made out of protein. So it's going to affect all of your, you know, so many things, your skin and your hair and your nails. So many people, I mean, collagen is a protein, but you'll regularly see someone buy a collagen supplement, but they're only getting 20 to 30 grams of protein a day, and now they're taking in pure collagen. They don't realize that collagen isn't actually even ending up in your skins and nails. It's going to try and make other hormones and vital bodily processes like your immune system, just to keep you alive, sort of thing, you know. So the first step then, after sort of dealing with the drinks side of things, is I try to say, look, this week over here, I want you to try and eat sort of this many grams of protein per day. And, you know, for the female clients, I tend to set it a little bit easier because they struggle with a bit more, but it's still a decent number, 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's a pretty good threshold. Even for a lot of athletes, that's a minimum recommended amount for certain times of the training year. You're definitely going to get enough in there to be able to do all sorts of things like build a bit of muscle, keep your immune system healthy, and have yourself actually recovering from the exercise that they're not doing. Because, you know, it's always alarming when you're training someone and you think this person should be improving, and they're struggling to put on strength. They're getting sore and achy joints, when normally with like 95% of your other clients, all their joints are feeling way better after 6 months of training. If your joints are starting to feel worse and you aren't training too hard, you're trying to take that into account, you know, you often got to look at the diet, and protein is a huge factor there. And then once you've got the protein
essential
down,
fatty acids.
Yeah.
Oh man, I can't tell you, like,
oh yeah,
I suffered with inflammation in my hips for like a year, and I was trying to work out everything, and all it came down to was I stopped taking omega-3s. Yeah. And I took omega-3s again, and like a week later I had no pain in my hips. Better. I was like, oh.
I take that fish oil, the real deal omega, but I take it in the actual proper oil format.
Oh,
where you like put it on the spoon and you take it.
That
well,
taste
no,
is
because
disgusting.
no, this is like, it's got a hint of lemon. It's like sort of lemon scented, this one at least. But the difference is there's like what most people don't know. So those types of fatty acids, those polyunsaturated fatty acids, they go off really quickly. So the fats go rancid. And so if you take it in capsule form, you don't know how long it's been sitting on the shelf.
True.
And so what you should theoretically do is you should crack one open and smell it, because you'll be able to tell straight away if it's gone rancid. So just my theory is, if I buy the oil in the bottle and I open it, so I'll automatically know if it's rancid. Because if it's rancid, you aren't getting any benefits. You're actually creating a lot of oxidative stress. I just check the expiry dates
and I buy the best quality.
Yeah,
I'm using Metagenics at the moment.
Oh, well, yeah, they're a good brand.
And yeah, I found
they're one of the best brands.
It's worked for me like unbelievably.
Yeah. I went to, the one time I went to a sports dietitian, that was like the brand of actually said, if you're getting vitamins and stuff like that, that's what you should get. So yeah, but the protein and also an added side effect of that higher protein intake, especially, and what a lot of clients don't understand, regardless of who they are, especially if you wanted to lose weight, is that protein is the food with the highest satiety factor. So it makes you feel full. Fats also do a bit, but protein really hits those satiety receptors in your brain, so it just makes you think, yo, I've had enough. It's very filling, and so then you're not going to want to eat as much of everything else. It helps you stick to sort of a calorie range. And then once we sort of start getting the proteins down, then we just look at our calorie range, and I don't like to put people in too big a calorie deficit. I don't like recommending that. Even 500 calories a day, I think, is pretty hard to sustain. So I recommend between like 300 and 500 calorie deficit a day. Don't panic if you don't hit it for a day or 2 or 3 days in a row. You know, don't starve yourself the next day to try and make up the difference. It's not quite how it works. Just make sure you get your protein content in. Make sure you're trying to stick within those calorie ranges, and you're going to begin to lose weight on that. And I don't like to rush weight loss. I try to explain to people that weight loss isn't just a straight line down, it's a zigzagging curve. So you're going to go up, you're going to go down, you're going to go up, you're going to go down. A lot of the time you're going to go up and down purely because of your glycogen stores in your muscles. So we mentioned glycogen earlier, which is, you know, your carbohydrate stores. For every gram of carbohydrates you store in your muscle, you're going to store another 3 grams of water. And now let's say someone can store 500 grams of carbohydrates. That's 2 kilograms in total, because with the water weight, if you starve yourself and do an exercise session and use up all your glycogen stores, you're going to drop 2 kilograms straight away. You're going to feel really good about yourself, but then you go and you eat your carbohydrates, you get them up again, you drink enough, what you should be doing to be healthy, you're getting your hydration, your carbs in, you're going to shoot up 2 kilograms. Oh no, I just lost, you know, I just put on all the weight up, like I lost. So we're going to look at that as well. You know, we're going to try and keep it. It's a process. It's not happening too quickly. Don't freak out. We just stick to these calorie guidelines. Over time, you're going to begin to lose weight. Once you get more and more comfortable with hitting those calorie guidelines, we can really start talking about quality of food, because I think that's really hard for people to get as well, is to get the quality of the food, to get all the micronutrients in, you know, get all those greens in, and of varying kinds, you know, not just spinach, not just broccoli. Get your spinach, your broccoli, your asparagus, your green beans. You want a variety of greens, you want a variety of vegetables. I think that's often really hard for people to try add in right away while trying to maintain a calorie deficit. Let's target 1 or 2 things at a time, and we slowly over a process of weeks and months, hopefully even years, work on the diet. I don't think you can just snap a person into eating a certain way, like, you know, over the course of a month or 2. I don't think it's sustainable.
Yeah, and without a coach or someone like yourself monitoring and giving advice, I wouldn't even recommend the calorie deficit or even counting calories.
No.
It's just like,
you're going to obsess over it.
Eat as healthily as you can, you know the good choices out there, and give yourself a window every day where you can give your digestive system a break. So some form of a intermittent fast is always good. Drink enough pure water, and eat a varied diet that's full of fruits and vegetables and good quality proteins and fats and carbs.
And I think also just trying to be consciously aware of the amount you eat in a meal. Try to just begin to become conscious of how full you feel after a meal, and then try not eat to complete.
I think if you appreciate the food as well,
yes,
in a almost like a spiritual sense, that you're not just taking it for granted and eating it like a glutton would, you know. It's like really appreciate where the food's come from and what it's going to do for you and how it's going to act in the body. Like, it's so true that you are what you eat. If you're eating a whole bunch of shit the whole time, you can't expect yourself to be amazing, look good, feel good. You're not. You're going to feel like what you've eaten.
Exactly. And I think definitely a way to help out with that is also those other tips that I'm sure people have heard before, but really help, like not going to the shops when you're hungry, so that when you go to the shops, you don't buy all the junk food and the things that are easy to snack and to binge on at home, but to buy really nice quality ingredients that you can appreciate when you get home, and then you don't have the temptation of I might have eaten this like lovely meal filled with like 6 different greens and like peppers and, you know, all kinds of other veg and some lean meat, and then I'm going to go afterwards and eat like half a tub of ice cream because it's there, and because, you know, it's there, and I feel kind of like ice cream, it's not going to hurt, let me go for it. Like, you know, it starts in the shop and what you take home.
I think we'll leave it there now for the diet and so let's get on to our last topic of discussion. So let's use a performance athlete. So let's say it's someone that's already competing, maybe on a national level. Let's call him a triathlete. Or let's focus on one discipline rather. Let's say he's a cyclist. And this guy wants to improve his endurance ability. And let's maybe go on to what we were speaking about earlier, the VO2 max, lactate threshold specifically. How would you use that in his training, and what sort of advice could you give this person to increase his performance?
Yeah, so I think what's always good is when you get an athlete to always remember that they're there to improve at their sport, and not to get all excited with all the ideas of what you want to do with them in your head. It's all about the athletes, it's not about you. It's about getting them to their goal. And so if it's an endurance athlete, obviously the majority of their training is going to be focusing on improving their endurance for their specific goal, whatever the distance or, you know, time frame might be. And you obviously, when you start off with the athlete, we're going to get them in. We're preferably going to do some exercise tests with them. And now those tests will be specific to their goals. So it might be something like a VO2 max test if you have access to the lab, or a VO2 max test equivalent. There are a few of those. It might be a time trial of a certain distance. It's something that'll both indicate where the guy's performance level is at, and also then help give us an indication of sort of training intensities that we can use going forward to train in those zones that we mentioned earlier. Then when we actually look at the training, we're going to look at the sort of the time of year and how long they have to prepare for whatever event they have, whether they're in the off season, what we call, or the general prep or build, base phase, or their build phase, pre-competition phase, or their in competition phase is going to affect it, and that's going to affect the amount of time that we spend sort of training in each zone. So generally, the way we like to look at it, if you are sort of starting off before a season, you're building your base. This is your base training. This is where we're building that aerobic engine. We're building the ability to endure. We're obviously going to spend the majority of our time in our lower intensity base endurance training zones. So the majority of the training is going to be done at a lower intensity. It's going to be going for longer, and then with much smaller periods of time spent at those higher intensity levels, at that threshold level or above. People have gone and done lots and lots of studies on this and how to apply it, and in general, for most people, you'll be spending between 70 to 80, 85% of your total training time as an endurance athlete in that base phase, in that sort of zone 2 to 3 kind of base training zone, and most of that time will actually even be in the zone 2. So we call it over distance training, where you're just going for miles out and you're spending a lot of time out there trying to build that aerobic base. Obviously, the level of the athlete is going to affect how much time you can actually spend out there, how much time they have available for training, and also the discipline. I mean, for example, a cyclist can spend a lot more time on the bike than a runner going out and running on the road. Why? Well, there's just more impact on the joints for a runner, so it's going to, they can't spend as much time out on the road. It's going to break them down, so they spend slightly less time, but it's still a long amount of time. Then in that same training phase, we'd look at something between maybe 10 to 15% at that like lactate threshold kind of zone, and then we're looking at less than 5% of the time in our real high intensity zone, sort of building that speed and that quality work. And then let's not forget that some of the time is also going to be spent in that recovery zone, and we can even look at sort of sessions that are recovery sessions that are building technique. Technique sessions are a great recovery session, especially for endurance athletes, because a lot of coaches get too caught up in building that physiology side of things, building that endurance, building that high intensity endurance, how far, how hard can you go, and they don't look at how you actually move when you're doing it, and working on a very important side of sports performance, but especially endurance performance, your exercise economy, how efficient you're being when you move.
Setup, aerodynamics, even your fuel.
Running, aerodynamics, your movement on the bike, your running gait, your running economy. So basically, exercise economy is literally the definition of it is, say I'm getting from point A to B, how much energy did I waste at that exercise zone? So if I'm a runner, how much energy am I sending out into all frames of the world instead of sending myself from point A to point B? How much energy am I wasting? So the more efficient you are, the higher your economy is, the better you're moving, the better your technique is essentially. And obviously, if you are in a sport where you're running on or working on a device like a bike, cycling, your bike setup, or if you're rowing, your rowing setup, that's going to have a real impact on your economy, because it's going to affect your joint angles, it's going to affect how you use your muscles, what muscles you use. So that's a huge
which
section
ultimately
over there.
all leads into performance.
Yeah, it does. And that's why you hear stories.
And even longevity and injuries in these kinds of
things. Definitely. Though I think especially when we get to the elite side of things, those guys, they end up training a lot more for performance than longevity, and we could even argue it has a negative impact on their longevity.
I don't think they consider longevity at all.
They don't.
No. It's like, okay, performance no matter what, which is fine. I mean, it's great for us to watch. It wouldn't be as fun a spectator sport if we weren't watching the best of the best, And
it's what they want. It's all down to, if they feel they that's what they want in life. Like, who are you to argue as a coach?
100%.
And then obviously that sort of training thing of the percentages you spend in sort of each zone is going to change a little bit as you go throughout the season. Classically, so traditionally, the way it works is the closer you get to sort of a competition, the less amount of time you sort of spend in those lower intensity zones. By less, it's still the majority of time. You're still going to be spending more than 60% of your time probably in those lower intensity zones as an endurance athlete, but you're going to spend more time, you're going to add more high quality sessions in to your training. So you're going to have more sessions where you're operating at that lactate threshold zone, you're operating above your lactate threshold intensity, ranging from like high intensity interval training all the way to sprint interval training, trying to work on those peak metrics, trying to work on your speed that you can operate at. That's at least the traditional periodization model. Obviously, it can vary from coach to coach, but for most athletes, it's going to work pretty well. For very experienced athletes, we might try to change it up a little bit. We look at different strategies to getting them better, but that's generally the way we're going to do it. We start off with sort of broad, general, just building a big base, and we focus on then improving the quality and the intensity of that work the closer we get to race day. And then when we actually get it really approaching race day, in the final sort of like 2 to 3 weeks, depends on how long the race is or the primary race is, we hit what we call a taper, and that's where you start cutting back on mainly on your exercise volume, so the amount of exercise you're doing, so it allows the body to recover, and then what we call super compensate, so then you get even better and you get a nice performance peak, so you're suddenly able to add an extra sort of 1 to 2 to 3, I think some people up to 5 to 6% performance improvement with a really good taper, and that's how you hit race day sort of feeling fresh. And we'll look at those factors, and then so we'll use those exercise tests that we do at the beginning to sort of set the training zones for that phase. We prescribe the amount of time and the number of sessions that they need to do in those training zones and what the sessions are. After about 10 to 12 weeks, normally minimum, you want to give it at least 3 months. I would prefer we retest again. That test allows us to see if the person's improved. Is our training plan actually working? And then if it is, that's great. We're then going to adapt the program to the new things, the new phase of training. If it isn't working, we got to figure out why it isn't working and how we can actually get them improving. And that's basically just a general summary of
these specific people. I'd love to see more of them in the gym coming through, getting help, because I think they're the guys that can really improve the most. Well, not necessarily, but I mean, there's so many athletes out there that aren't participating at their full potential because they're not training in the correct zones, or don't even know about training zones and haven't even done lactate or VO2 max thresholds. But there's some amazing athletes out there that are just training completely wrong, and I'd love to see more of them coming in, getting help, getting advice, and like working with coaches like yourself.
Well, exactly. I think the most common, especially in the endurance athletes, the most common mistake by far that people make is training in what we call the gray zone, which is training around your lactate threshold pace all the time, every single day. Like
I made that mistake for years, and I was getting overuse injury after overuse injury.
That's after exactly overuse injury. Because especially in the start of your sort of endurance journey, if you will, you'll see a lot of improvements training at that intensity, because it's your race intensity. So you're going to get better at your race intensity, and especially when you're less fit. So that intensity is going to get a bit faster, and you're going to be able to last longer. So you're going to see these big improvements, and you think that's how I train. But like you said, it's really hard on the body. I did a lactate threshold session, was it yesterday? And it takes it out of you. You should take at least 48 hours between your next hard run if you do a proper intense session. Obviously, some athletes are special and they can recover a lot faster than others, but for most of us, we need to take that time to recover. And if I were to do that and try to do that day in, day out, I'm going to get those overuse injuries, and I'm not going to progress as far in the long run. And then, like you said, you still see athletes doing really well even when they train like that. So imagine what they could do if they maybe sort of invest some time in different aspects of their training.
And thanks so much for coming today. You've given us so much insight into sports science in general, and we had some really interesting discussions. I think there's going to be a lot more in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a ton of fun. Hopefully managed to keep it not overly complex with all the scientific innuendo and stuff. But I'm sure we're going to have lots more conversations. We're going to be able to break down things, make it a bit easier for everyone to understand and use, hopefully, to educate. Cool.
Thanks for coming. It's a wrap.
Sweet.